Back to Miller. Oh my goodness.
Herbert.
Sidearm sling, and it's a touchdown.
Tyrese Maxey.
Oh, good spin move by Filipowski for the news. Give him 9.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Beef Up Front podcast on Pig Swap Media. This is your host, Ryan Coyle. As always, continuing on in our series today, the NFL season preview series. We started with the NFC East. We've already done breaking down the first place Philadelphia Eagles and my second place projected team, the Dallas Cowboys. Today, we will be getting into my third place team, which is the New York Giants, who I have going 6-11. I have them taking a significant step back from last year's 9-7-1 record. I have the Giants going 6-11, 2-4 in the NFC East. That's only good enough for 12th place in the NFC. Last year, they were a playoff team, won a playoff game. This year, they will not be returning, I believe. As I touched on last year, 9-7-1, won the wild card round game versus the Vikings, 31-24. But they went to Philadelphia and got pounded in the divisional round, 38-7. Including the playoffs last year, the Giants were 8-4-1 in games decided by 8 or less points, so one-score games. So they won all but one of their games by one score. They weren't – well, including the playoffs, 2 of those games, I guess. But they weren't a team that was really belching out consistent victories throughout the season. This was a team that was winning a lot of close games, and that is the hallmark of a good team sometimes. But you look at a team like the Eagles last year, they routinely put some beatdowns on some teams as well. And we didn't really see that out of the New York Football Giants last year. So I think the main reason why I don't have them finishing with that similar success that they did last year is my whole take on them last year was they just weren't a very overall talented team. And they still were able to kind of shut my mouth, win some games, go on and win a playoff game, which was very impressive. But then you got shown the door by the Eagles, who were clearly a much more talented team. You could say this is a biased take being an Eagles fan and whatnot, but they lost 38-7 and didn't even belong on the same field as the Eagles in the playoff. Your talent's going to eventually get exposed. I think they caught some lucky breaks last year. They kind of rode some momentum. A lot of guys were improve it type years trying to play for NFL jobs, and they had a team really playing hard. But when it comes down to it, at the end of the day, not one of the 10 most talented rosters in the NFL. And then you bring back a guy with Daniel Jones, who going into last season, the team didn't even pick up his option because they didn't believe on him. And he goes out, has a career year. Is that sustainable? We'll see. We'll kind of get into more of it. But this is a team that has a challenging schedule out of their gate. Only 4 of their first 11 games are at home, and one of those is versus the Jets. So that's kind of a neutral site game at MetLife. So this is a Giants team that I think has an uphill climb this year. As I said, 6-11. That's good enough for 12th in the NFC, and obviously no playoffs out of there. But just like the Eagles and the Cowboys episode, we'll break down the offense, the defense, go into the coach a little bit, breakout player, and 2 games to watch on the schedule. When you look at the offense, it's headlined by Daniel Jones at the quarterback spot. He took a massive leap last year. Pat on the back for him. He really turned me into, I'm not going to say a believer, but silenced a lot of doubters last year. And, people didn't really have much of a reason to believe in him from the progress we saw from him throughout his first few years in the NFL. And last year with Brian Daboll back in the fold now, he took a significant leap. Can he sustain that and continue to do that and be the Giants' long-term quarterback remains to be seen. But led the Giants to a playoff victory. Was he worth that $160 million extension he got? That remains to be seen. I don't think so, but the Giants are lucky enough that they can get out of that, I believe, after 2 years. I think it's more so like a 2-year, $80 million deal with all that guaranteed money kind of up front. And then in the back end years, they have a potential out of it. So his potential, his best football potential, I think, could still be ahead of him with Brian Daboll, as we saw turn Josh Allen into a really raw prospect, into one of the top 5 quarterbacks in the NFL. Some people want to say he's number 2 or 3. I got him closer down to 5, but he transformed Josh Allen. And I think Josh Allen kind of took a step back last year without Brian Daboll there. But can Daniel Jones continue to be the best version of himself that Brian Daboll got out of him last year, or maybe even better? That remains to be seen, and I'm not the biggest believer in that. I just think, as I touched on in the prelude a little bit, the overall talent of this team, especially on the offensive side of the ball, would expose in the playoffs against the Eagles. I still think the offensive weapons are very limited with this team. They brought back Sterling Shepard, who's coming off another injury. It seems like concussion, shoulder injury, torn ACL, torn Achilles. And they keep trying this guy out there, and he can produce at times when he's on the field, but he's getting up there in age. He's really been battling injuries and not exactly striking fear into the defenses. Another guy that they're counting on, they signed Paris Campbell out of Indianapolis this offseason. He hasn't been a guy that could stay healthy. And then a guy that is a number 3 option probably on most teams, and Isaiah Hodgins is really going to be counted on as like a number 2 for them, maybe even a number 1. And then Darius Slayton. You know, if I'm a defensive coordinator in the NFC or the NFL as a whole, I'm not really intimidated by that group of pass catchers. I am a big fan of rookie wide receiver out of Tennessee, though, Jalen Hyatt. I think we could see a big role from him from day one. Just a pure speedster. Still needs to work on his route running, refining his routes, but he torched Alabama last year. I believe for 4 touchdowns in one game. I think Brian Daboll and his offensive creativity will find a lot of ways to get the ball into Jalen Hyatt's hands. Darren Waller also was a big-time pickup at tight end for them in the offseason. Daniel Bellinger, their other tight end, had a pretty solid year last year with Daniel Jones, but Darren Waller, when healthy, is one of the 3 or 4 best tight ends in football. But he's a guy that has been unable to stay on the field since he got that big money contract from the Raiders. I think that's why they kind of wanted to unload that salary cap and that contract and get away from that. So another guy with health concerns, and he hasn't been able to consistently stay on the field the last few years. And then the big headliner is Saquon Barkley being back at running back after being the franchise tag. He signed like a 1-year, $11 million deal, I believe it is, with incentives. So this is another running back that is unhappy with his contract, but it seems like he just wants to get back out there and play football with his teammates. Last year, he had the best year of his NFL career, going for a little over 1,300 rushing yards and 10 touchdowns. But last year was the first year Saquon Barkley played 16 games since his rookie season. So do we trust him to be the durable back in back-to-back years? I don't know if I'm buying that. 1,300 yards and 10 touchdowns, and he did a lot of work in the receiving game as well. He had a great year, but I don't know if I'm trusting him to stay healthy again this year. And playing on that 1-year contract with no security, is he willing to go out there when he's banged up, when he's not 100%? Is he going to still give it all he has and push to play in these games when he knows he doesn't have that security behind him with the contract and the money-wise? Risk future injury when he goes out there. It's a toss-up. You might see Saquon Barkley kind of take a few more games off this year, and because I think the Giants are still going to try and use him at their full disposal. And if Saquon Barkley does miss games, Matt Breida is the backup, and that's not exactly screaming excitement to the New York Giants fans. So I do have a lot of hesitancy about this offense, especially with Daniel Jones at quarterback, not being the biggest believer in him going back-to-back years of really successful football. Can Saquon and Darren Waller stay healthy? Those are big question marks as well. But I do think the offensive line is a positive for this team, and I think a group that's really headed in the right direction to be one of the better groups in football. Young and improving unit. I like Andrew Thomas at left tackle, Evan Neal at right tackle. I think that's going to be a really solid tackle duo for Daniel Jones or whoever the future quarterback of the Giants could be. And then I really like the draft pick of rookie center John Michael Schmitz. I think he's going to be rock solid as a rookie center, just a guy that doesn't have much holes in his game, and I think is going to fit in right away. And then Ben Brenson and Mark Lewinsky are pretty serviceable guards on the interior. So I do think this group has a chance to be up front, one of the top 10 offensive lines in the league this year. And if you would have said that a couple years ago, where the Giants were arguably the laughingstock of the league on the offensive line, most people would laugh at you. So they've done a good job of overhauling this group. If they're able to stay healthy and keep Daniel Jones upright, Darren Waller able to stay healthy, and Saquon stay healthy, that could be a different story. I could see this team potentially going back to the playoffs. But you heard me say if for a bunch of these people, Sterling Shepard included as well. If all these guys stay healthy, all right, they could be back to the playoffs, back to being a playoff team. But I just don't see it with this group, and I'm not counting on it. So I do think when your best 2 offensive playmakers are Saquon Barkley and Darren Waller, guys with injury history, that's a major area of concern. So that's my take on the offense for the New York Giants. The defense, though, I'm a little bit more optimistic in. I think the defense should be a pretty solid unit, and when we look back on it at the end of the year, could be a group that's in kind of the middle of the pack in the NFL. They're headlined by up front Leonard Williams and Dexter Lawrence on the defensive line, one of the better lineman duos in the entire NFC. And then they do have a nice pair of young edge rushers that I'm kind of excited to see grow alongside each other. You look at Azeez Ojulari, who has emerged as a pretty promising pass rusher, has 13 and a half sacks through 2 years, 5 in his rookie year, 8.5 last year. So he took a pretty solid jump there in year 2. I expect another jump this season, get to double digits. And then you look at Kayvon Thibodeau, had a solid rookie season as well last year out of Oregon. He only had 4 sacks, but I'm expecting in the 8 to 10 range from him, kind of like that Azeez Ojulari jump. When you look at kind of the secondary, then Deonte Banks out of Maryland, he was their first-round pick. He figures to start opposite of Adoree Jackson, who is another guy who's a really talented player, but a pretty injury-prone player as well. And then Bobby McKinney McKinney at safety out of Alabama a few years ago. He's emerged as one of the better safeties, I think you could say, in the NFC. And Bobby McCain, the other one. That's a pretty solid safety duo as well. So the secondary, I think, has a pretty solid chance to be good. The linebackers, they could be better. Bobby Okereke is a pretty solid player. Micah McFadden as well. Kind of the 2 guys in the middle there, your off-ball linebackers. But I'm excited about that group up front. And I think, especially with the creativity that Wink Martindale brings on the defensive end in terms of his pressures and his blitzes, I think this could be a pretty opportunistic group and be able to, if that group up front is able to dominate and cause a lot of pressure, cause a lot of sacks, I think this could be a team that could potentially be a top 12 defense in the league this upcoming season. I do think the defense is set up to have better success for the offense. It always depends kind of in the NFL on your health, but when you have a lot of, probably you look at your top 10 guys, when 3 or 4 of them are pretty injury-prone players, it's kind of hard to have a lot of faith in, especially in back-to-back seasons. So that's why I'm taking the Giants at 6-11. I'm a little worried about their health and kind of their top-end talent, especially with the top-end talent being these injury-prone players. My coach grade for Brian Daboll, I'm going to give him a B+. He's turned out to be one of the better offensive minds in football and a really good quarterback developer. Look at what he did with Josh Allen. You look at what he did last year with Daniel Jones' first year. I think a true testament of him is going to be if Daniel Jones can continue that success. And that team last year wasn't very talented. That's why I was out on them the whole year. That eventually got exposed in the playoffs. But still, he was able to win 9 games with that roster. I think that was a really successful year 1 for Brian Daboll, and I think he's kind of a top 10 to 12 coach in the NFL. Very, very good creative offensive mind and really good at developing the quarterback spot. My breakout player for this New York Football Giants team, I'm going to go with the second-round receiver out of Tennessee that I touched on earlier with wide receiver Jalen Hyatt. Speed is just something you can't teach, and Jalen Hyatt has just that. More so than anybody else in this offense, he's the most explosive player outside of Saquon Barkley. And he doesn't have the biggest competition in front of him. We touched on Isaiah Hodgins, Sterling Shepard, Paris Campbell, and Darius Slayton being the receivers ahead of him. I think early and often he's going to have a chance to jump those guys. And I think the creativity of Brian Daboll, they're going to figure out ways to get the ball in this guy's hands, whether it's in the return game, handoff, screens, the deep ball. This is a guy that has a lot of speed, and he's going to put a lot of fear into opposing defenses. So watch out for Jalen Hyatt. If you're doing a dynasty fantasy draft, try to target him, or even your regular season season-long draft. I think Jalen Hyatt could be a very, very valuable wide receiver asset there as well. And 2 games to watch for the New York Giants this year. We're going to go week 1 versus the Cowboys on Sunday Night Football. I think those 2 teams are most likely competing for second place in the division behind the Eagles. But those are 2 of the biggest brands in the NFL. Face off on Sunday Night Football week 1. Should be a lot of eyeballs on that game. And then week 16, the Giants at the Eagles on the Monday Night Football broadcast. That's a 4:30 game, but that's on Christmas Day. So that'll be another really fun and highly anticipated game throughout most of the season. So that's my take on the New York Giants for 2023. 6-11, missing the playoffs after making the playoffs and winning a playoff game last year. I don't think Daniel Jones has that similar success. And I just think when some of your best players are that injury prone, it's kind of hard to rely and depend on them for back-to-back years. So thank you, everyone, for listening. Our next episode, obviously, will be the Commanders, and I'll give my entire breakdown on them and why I think they'll be finishing in last place in the NFC East this year. But as always, thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Please like, subscribe, and we'll talk soon.